I want my last words to be Rosebud. You'll get that reference if you're 60 years old or a film enthusiast. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are 10 most famous American convicts' last words. Make sure to subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's go crazy. Go stupid. Number 10, Jimmy Glass. Jimmy L. Glass was an American convicted slaughterer who was sentenced to execution by the state of Louisiana. Glass originally hailed from Arkansas. He was a high school dropout and had a criminal record. With fellow inmate Jimmy C. Wingo, Glass escaped from the Webster Parish, Louisiana jail in December 1982, and during their escape, they ended Newt Brown and his wife, Earlene Neely Brown, at their home on Christmas Eve in Dixie Inn outside Minden. The Browns' son, Gary Lamar Brown, was the son-in-law of Judge Charles A. Marvin of the Louisiana Court of Appeal for the Second Circuit, based in Shreveport. Glass and Wingo were soon arrested. Both were sentenced to execution in the chair. According to law in Louisiana back then, the only authorized method of execution was the electric chair. Glass and his lawyers argued that executions by electrocution violate the 8th and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution, because causing to pass through the body of the person convicted of current of electricity of sufficient intensity to cause execution, and the application and continuance of such current through the body of the person convicted until such person is gone, and electrocution causes the gratuitous infliction of unnecessary pain and suffering and does not comport with evolving standards of human dignity. His very last words after the whole trial and sitting on Demise Row were, "I'd rather be fishing." And I mean, I think he would have rather to do anything except getting executed, but good for him. Number 9, Barbara Graham. Barbara Elaine Bonnie Wood Graham was an American criminal convicted of slaughter. Henry Graham was addicted to illegal substances and known as a hardened but low-level criminal. Through him, Barbara met his friends Jack Santo and Emmett the Weasel Perkins, both with criminal records. She started an affair with Perkins, who told her about a 64-year-old widow, Mabel Monahan, who was alleged to keep a large amount of cash and jewelry in her home in Burbank, California. On the evening March 9th, 1953, Graham reportedly gained entry by knocking on the door and asked to use Monahan's phone due to car trouble. Once Monahan opened the door for Graham, Perkins, Santo, and True came in behind her, followed later by Shorter. Shorter claimed that when he entered the home, Monahan was already bleeding and her mouth was gagged. The gang tore up Monahan's home looking for the safe, money, and or jewels, to no avail. True stated that Graham handed a gun to Perkins and told him to knock her out. Shorter claimed that at this point, he threw Perkins to the floor and convinced True to remove the gag because he noticed Monahan was having trouble breathing. True did not mention these events and stated that Graham began to viciously beat Monahan. After the gang left, Santo assumed Monahan was gone. However, Shorter, once alone, purportedly called for help from a payphone. The address given to the operator was incorrect, and Monahan was discovered 2 days later by her gardener. What was Graham's last words? "Good people are always so sure they're right." She's not wrong, but still, you did commit a crime. Get off the high horse. Number 8, Sarah Good. Good was accused of witchcraft on March 6, 1692, when Abigail Williams and Elizabeth Parris, related to the Reverend Samuel Parris, claimed to be bewitched under her hand. The young girls asserted that they had been bitten, pinched, and otherwise abused. They would often have fits in which their bodies would appear to be voluntarily convulsing, their eyes rolling into the back of their heads, and their mouths hanging open. When the Reverend Samuel Parris asked, "Who torments you?" the girls eventually shouted out the names of 3 townspeople: Tituba, Sarah Osborne, and Sarah Good. Sarah Good was sent to burn, her last words being this: "I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." Ooh, that's creepy. Number 7, James Lewis Jackson. James Lewis Jackson was executed by lethal injection on the 7th of February 2007 in Huntsville, Texas, for the slaughters of his wife and 2 stepdaughters. James and Sharon Jackson married in 1995. Sharon had 2 teenage daughters, Sansaria, who was called Sunny, and Erica. James Jackson's heavy substance use and inability to hold a job produced problems in the marriage. He wrote a note that was found by police that said, "I love Sharon, Sunny, and Erica. I could not take care of my family. I don't have a job. I gave them back to God. He and they will understand. James." They found Jackson's note and also observed that Erica was nude from the waist down when she was found. While deputies were investigating the scene, James Jackson drove up. He he was taken to the sheriff's office where he confessed to the slaughters, giving the account. At his trial, prosecutors presented evidence that following the slaughters, Jackson pawned his wife's sewing machine and used the money to buy substances. Jackson had a previous felony conviction in 1989 for shooting his children's grandfather. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He served 4.5 years before being paroled in 1994. He was still on parole at the time of the endings. A jury convicted Jackson of the slaughters of Sinceria and Erica Jackson in January 1998 and sentenced him to execution. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the conviction and sentence in December 2000. All of his subsequent appeals in state and federal court were denied. In an interview from Demise Row the week before his execution, Jackson denied committing the slaughters. He said that he spent that entire evening out, gambling and getting high, and did not come home. He also said his wife had no plans to end the relationship, which was important to the case. Jackson said that the note he left behind was a prayer, written weeks earlier asking God to protect his family. Jackson's siblings and friends attended his execution. None of the victims' families were present though. Jackson smiled as his guests entered the viewing room. "This is not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter," Jackson said to them in his final statement. "I love you all. See you on the other side." Jackson also referred to Harris County as Sodom and Gomorrah, two ancient cities that God destroyed by fire according to the book of Genesis. His last words were, "Warden, end me." The lethal injection was then started. Number 6. Robert Charles Towery. Towery and accomplice Randy Barker went to the home of 68-year-old Mark Jones to rob the Paradise Valley philanthropist. Jones knew Towery as his mechanic and even had loaned him money, and let them into the home. Towery pulled a pistol on Jones and Barker handcuffed him. Towery took valuables from the house and loaded them into Jones's vehicle. Barker took Jones to the bedroom. Towery told Jones that he was going to give him injections with something that would make him sleep. Towery then injected Jones with battery acid. Jones was not struggling because he trusted Towery. Towery then sought to strangle Jones to execution. Then, when that first failed, he tried again and succeeded. Towery and Barker then left in Jones's car, unloaded Jones's property at their home, and left the car in a nearby parking lot. On September 5th, 1991, Jones's body was discovered. On September 12th, 1993, Jones's car was discovered. As a result of a tip given to the Silent Witness program, Towery and Barker were later arrested. Some of Jones's property was recovered from Towery's and Barker's homes. In exchange for his testimony, accomplice Barker pled guilty to second-degree slaughter, served only 10 years in prison, and was released. In his last words, Towery apologized to his family and to the victims. He talked about bad choices he had made. Then he said, as he appeared to be crying, "I love my family. Potato, potato, potato." His reference to potatoes was a message to a nephew who witnessed the execution and referred to the sound made by a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Towery's attorney, Dale Bache, said it was Towery's way of telling his nephew that everything was okay. Number 5. George Engel. On May 3rd, 1886, after hearing about the massacre at the McCormick plant earlier that day, he attended a meeting at Grief's Hall. This meeting, later dubbed by prosecutors the Monday Night Conspiracy, was used to prove that there was a conspiracy in the bombing at the Haymarket. A witness claimed that Engel had arranged a plan to storm and/or dynamite police stations and shoot policemen should trouble occur. Engel claims it was a meeting only in which it was proposed to give aid to any strikers if the police or the Pinkertons should attack said strikers. The following night, May 4th, as the bombing took place, Engel was not in Haymarket Square, but was at home playing cards. Nevertheless, he was arrested the next day and charged with conspiracy in the bombings. At 50, he was the oldest of the defendants to stand trial. He was convicted and was sentenced to be hanged. After hearing in 1887 that several letters had been written from Samuel Fielden and Michael Schwab to Illinois Governor Richard James Oglesby, Engel wrote his own letter asking the governor not to consider any clemency, stating that, "Not being conscious of any guilt, the powers that be may end me, but they can't legally punish me. I protest against a commutation of my sentence and demand either liberty or demise." Well, he got demise. His last words were, "Hurrah for anarchy. This is the happiest moment of my life." Glad he's got something going on for him. Number 4. James French. James French was serving a life sentence in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister for ending Frank Boone, a West Virginia motorist who had picked him up while hitchhiking in 1958. French had requested an execution sentence for that charge, but the jury handed down a life sentence anyways, against his wishes. Dismayed, French wrote several letters to the governor asking for a new trial, one in which he could get an execution sentence. But the letters went unanswered and ignored. While serving his life sentence, French was placed with inmate Eddie Lee Shelton. The two did not get along, in addition to French growing tired of prison life. On October 27, 1961, French attacked Shelton. According to Oklahoma County District Judge Charles Owens, who was an assistant attorney general during French's time on Execution Row, French determined the victim should have at least a meal, so he treated Shelton to a steak sandwich from the prison canteen and allowed Shelton to go to breakfast. Upon Shelton's return from breakfast, French wrapped a towel around Shelton's neck and strangled Shelton. His last words were, "How about this for a headline for tomorrow's paper? French fries." He was executed by electric chair. That's a bad joke. Number 3, Johnny Frank Garrett. Garrett was accused of the slaughter of a Catholic nun that took place on October 31st, 1981, when he was 17 years old. According to the prosecution, that morning, Garrett abused, strangled, and ended 76-year-old Sister Tadia Benz in the St. Francis Convent. On November 9th, 1981, Garrett, who lived across the street from the convent, was arrested. Garrett was tried and convicted of the crime. He was held at Ellis Unit north of Huntsville, Texas, which at the time held men on the state of Texas's Execution Row. He was originally scheduled to be executed on January 6, 1992, but after Pope John Paul II asked for clemency, Governor of Texas Ann Richards gave him a temporary reprieve. After Richards' reprieve, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles held a hearing on whether Garrett should receive a commutation to life in prison, but the execution sentence was retained by a 17-1 vote. He was examined by Dr. Dorothy Otnow Lewis, who determined he had multiple personalities as a result of child abuse from his mother, grandmother, and grandfather. He was ultimately executed at age 28 at Huntsville Unit on February 11, 1992, by lethal injection. His last words were, "I'd like to thank my family for loving me and taking care of me. And the rest of the world can kiss my butt." Number 2, Thomas J. Grasso. Thomas Joseph Grasso was an American convicted slaughterer who was executed by the state of Oklahoma for the slaughter of 87-year-old Hilda Johnson, who he strangled in Tulsa in December 1990. He also slaughtered 81-year-old Leslie Holtz in New York in July 1991. Grasso's last meal was 2 dozen steamed mussels, 2 dozen steamed clams, flavored by a wedge of lemon, a double cheeseburger from Burger King, a half dozen barbecued spare ribs, 2 strawberry milkshakes, 1/2 of a pumpkin pie with whipped cream, diced strawberries, and he requested a can of SpaghettiOs with meatballs, though he used his last words to claim that kitchen staff did not honor this request. He has become posthumously known for his last words regarding his last meal. "I did not get my SpaghettiOs. I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this." This is an important guy. Number 1, Richard Zeitvogel. On March 25, 1984, at the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson City, Missouri, between 12 p.m. and 1 p.m., Richard Zeitvogel strangled his cellmate Gary Wayne Dew with red double-strand wire, leaving a distinctive pattern around the victim's neck. At 4:30 p.m., Zeitvogel called a correctional officer to his cell to report that he had strangled Dew. Department of Corrections investigators found the slaughter weapon in a book belonging to Zeitvogel. The texture of the red wire matched the injury pattern around the neck of Gary Dew. Investigators were also able to determine that Dew had attempted to remove the wire during the struggle based on marks that were found around his neck. Zeitvogel later told authorities that he strangled Dew because he wanted to receive an execution sentence so that he could room with capital punishment inmate Frank Goonan on Execution Row. Goonan and Zeitvogel had been co-defendants on a previous slaughter case, which occurred at the Missouri State Penitentiary on January 25, 1981. Zeitvogel was later convicted of this charge and was sentenced to life, 50 years without parole. Goonan was executed at the Potosi Correctional Center on October 6, 1993 for this offense, and a second execution sentence he received in the slaughter of another inmate. The victim in this case, Gary Wayne Dew, was serving a 7-year sentence for burglary first degree from St. Louis City. He was received in the Missouri Department of Corrections on November 11, 1981, and his last words, the last words for this video, keep the faith and rock on. Thanks for watching. Leave a like and comment if you enjoyed this one, and we'll see you next time on Crime Time.